Battled out, the British Army says it's hugely overstretched in Iraq and Afghanistan. US forces are exhausted and equipment's failing. Are cracks now appearing in the coalition of the willing? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm David Foster. The head of the British Army said on Sunday he has no fresh soldiers to send into battle. They need time, he says, to train and time to rest. Britain has more than 5,000 troops in Iraq. 7,000 more are in Afghanistan. And the human cost is taking its toll. In the last 5 months, nearly half of the 1,500 combat troops have needed significant medical attention. That's according to the London Observer newspaper. Many of them, keen to continue fighting the Taliban, have been patched up and returned to the front line. But despite their enthusiasm, the number of soldiers quitting the army now exceeds the number of recruits. In March 2003, when the first bombs landed on Baghdad, it was very different.
We're from Secretary Powell, who briefed us on the ever-growing coalition of the willing, nations who support our deep desire for peace and freedom. Over 40 nations now support our efforts. We're grateful for their determination. We appreciate their vision, and we welcome their support.
On the ground, it was nothing like that number to begin with. Just Poland, Denmark, Australia and Britain were with the United States at the start. They were joined during the course of 2003 by 33 other nations sending troops from around the globe. Well, since those heady days, 49 countries have joined the coalition at one time or another, but many have since quit Iraq. Denmark and Poland are expected to leave within the next month. Joining me to discuss this tonight from London, Peter Felsted, Chief Editor of Jane's Defence Weekly. Out of Washington, D.C., the American capital, Josh Rushing, Al Jazeera's military analyst. And joining us on the phone, Oliver Miles, former British ambassador. Gentlemen, welcome to Inside Story. Peter Felsted, let me come to you first of all and read you a list I've just pulled off of countries that have pulled out of Iraq since February of 2004. I won't go through it because it's very long, but I'll give you some idea. Hungary, Nicaragua, Spain, Dominican Republic, Honduras, Philippines, New Zealand, Tonga, Portugal, Japan, Italy. It goes on and on. When we talk about a coalition of the willing now, is there any sort of coalition at all in reality?
Well, the situation was somewhat difficult to begin with, given that this was not a NATO operation. This was, as you say, a coalition of the willing. And a lot of those countries would have provided dedicated units that would have been specialised in sort of either medical units or counterinsurgency units, either IED units. So we're not talking about significant troop amounts, just certain capabilities.
But the British forces seem to be scaling back. There's a suggestion that within a very short period of time, they too will be leaving Iraq. It will then be pretty much America on its own, won't it?
Yes, that's true. The situation that we face in the south is, of course, quite different to the situation that the Americans face, for example, in Baghdad and the Sunni Triangle, though. And it has always been our plan to wrap up our operation, hopefully by the end of 2007, bar certain observers left for oversight duties.
Josh Rushing, let me bring you in there, our military analyst in Washington, D.C. We're hearing reports, as you are, I'm sure, and your ear is much firmer to the ground than ours is, that the American forces on the ground are none too happy with the fact that the British seem to be scaling back.
Well, you know, they were really the only real partner that was in Iraq. Even with the British who were there, I think the Americans make up 92% of the coalition that's there. So truly what the Brits really represent is political capital that can be used on the international level, saying, you know, this isn't just America, this is an international effort. When the truth is, this is just America. This is unilateral. The British soldiers are on their way out. They've been dealing with Basra, as your guest said, is a very different situation than dealing with the Sunni Triangle or with Baghdad. like the Americans are. So this is clearly an American operation, and anything you hear about the coalition is simply politics at play.
However, when you see a leading British Sunday newspaper, the Sunday Telegraph, quoting a specific British general, Jonathan Shaw, saying that they got short shrift when he started lecturing American officers on counterinsurgency. This is a quote from an American officer: "It's insufferable, for Christ's sake. The guys were just rolling their eyeballs." The Americans maybe feel like they're being left in the lurch.
Well, you know, when he's talking about the counterinsurgency thing, America's been late to the game on that. The American military hasn't studied counterinsurgency operations since Vietnam, and they should have been. They are trying to quickly learn about those. As a matter of fact, they've just written a new counterinsurgency manual. Who wrote it? General David Petraeus himself, who's his expert on counterinsurgency in Baghdad. He actually had to reach out to an Australian officer, Dave Cucullin. So the Americans don't have a long history in this counterinsurgency thing and understanding it, and I can see how they might not have had an open ear to hearing it from the British officers in the beginning.
Ambassador Oliver Mars, let me bring you in. You spent a long time working in the Middle East. You're still closely associated with that area, but to the general public, you are perhaps best known for a letter that you and 51 others wrote to the Sunday Times addressing Tony Blair in 2004, saying, among other things, and if I may quote, "The government has an interest in working as closely as possible with the United States and in exerting real influence as a loyal ally." Do you think the American administration now feels like it is no longer able to depend on Britain?
Well, first of all, can I just correct you that our letter was not addressed to a newspaper, it was addressed to the Prime Minister. And secondly, I'd like just to finish that quotation that you made after we said that we should support, we agreed with the government that we should support the policy of the United States. We said that there is no case for supporting policies which are doomed to failure.
And if you'd like to continue that thought process, this undoubtedly was one of those policies.
Well, I think that's right. I think that we foresaw, and anybody who had any knowledge of Iraq or the region foresaw, that this policy was doomed to failure.
So what are British military officers thinking now when they talk about an impossible battle being fought in the south of the country, and some people suggest it's merely now a retreat rather than a sensible withdrawal?
I don't think they see it that way, and I would certainly not go along with anything that suggested that morale was suffering. The British forces, I think, are doing the job that they've been given by the government. They're doing it as best they can. The trouble is it's not doable. The responsibility, as you were hinting in the first part of the discussion, rests with the American government. They were the ones who took on this task. The British government went in support of the American effort. The Americans took on a very heavy responsibility.
So what do you think when General Sir Richard Dannard, head of the British Army, says the Army's certainly stretched, we can't deploy any more battle groups at the present moment? What do you think that does to morale?
Well, I think he's saying it the way it is, and I think that soldiers welcome it when their generals speak out and tell the truth. He's not saying we can't do the job in Iraq. That would be a different sort of statement. What he's saying is that we're stretched to the limit. Now, the government and our political leaders, although they still seem to be committed to this misguided operation, have indicated that they expect to wind down fairly quickly. The difficulty is, of course, that if the British were to wind down too quickly, what happens to the American line of retreat from Iraq? Because the Americans are going to have to get out too, and where are they going to have to come out through? Basra.
A thought from you, Peter Felsted, from Jane's Defence Weekly. General Dannard also last October said the strains of fighting in both Iraq and Afghanistan could break the British Army. Has the situation changed since then?
No, it has been exacerbated to some extent. It's not going to be a catastrophic failure, but it will have a long-term effect on the future capabilities of the British Armed Forces. Ironically, it will erode our capacity for high-intensity warfighting, because we simply won't have the troops around who are rested and then trained in large-scale exercises. So it does have that knock-on effect, and the longer that we go on in the current situation, the longer it will take to actually recover that capability.
And does the British military believe the real battle is now to be fought not in Iraq but in Afghanistan?
Well, I think there's a very strong perception within the military and elsewhere that There are more things that are militarily achievable in Afghanistan as opposed to Iraq, where essentially it's got to be solved on a political level.
And with the troops as they are at the moment in Afghanistan, can that battle be fought successfully?
Well, the troops, I'm sure, can do what they are expected to do, which at the moment is to actually support the Iraqi armed forces, to actually secure lines of communication, supply lines, guard the border with Iran, and where necessary provide operational support and fulfill the essential task of training. I'm sure that can be done. That is their mission, and I'm sure they can achieve it.
Peter Felsted, Josh Rushing, Ambassador Miles. We're going to take a short break now. When we return, we'll be asking our guests more about the future of the coalition in Iraq and also Afghanistan. Can it hold together? You're watching Inside Story.